So greetings from Pennsylvania once again. It's a chilly December 20th morning. And yes, we're starting another video series here on Pennsylvania's iron furnaces. And yes, I'm starting another new channel series here. And there will be more in the future. I have a few more series I'll be introducing this winter. And there's a reason why. I'll explain that a little bit later. But yeah, this will be on Pennsylvania's iron furnaces. So in this video, I'm going to introduce the series. Give you just a little bit of history about iron furnaces here in Pennsylvania. In this video, I'm also going to talk about how these furnaces worked. What was their purpose and how did they work? How do you make iron from these? So I'll explain that in this video so that as we go and visit other iron furnaces around the state and in other states, I won't have to explain that process in each video. I can just refer you to the initial video in this series on how it works. And another reason to do this is to document as many of these as we can. This one here even has seen a lot more damage since the last time I was here. That crack going up is bigger than I was here last summer, and it's already worsened. So just like the covered bridges in Pennsylvania, one by one these are disappearing. So I feel like doing a series on them, putting forth a concerted effort to film and document as many of them as we can before they're gone. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I'm going to yap for just a little bit on the importance of doing these series. Like we just started the covered bridge series as well here. But yeah, like I said, one by one, these pieces of history are disappearing. So I feel like trying to document as many of them as we can before they're gone, because once they're gone, they're gone. And also doing things in a series, like creating goals, helps me. I am not the most organized person in the world. I know some people think I'm super organized and I'm not. So putting together a series, like creating goals, like to get to every covered bridge in Pennsylvania or to get to as many of these as possible, helps inspire me, give me motivation to do it, because it can be kind of a daunting task at times. So I think it helps me as well. And also I put these in a playlist on my channel. Like I've been creating a number of playlists recently just to be more organized, and I think that helps greatly too. That way if someone is interested in this kind of history, everything's in a nice playlist on my channel. And yes, I have filmed a number of these iron furnaces in the past, and we will be visiting all those again, but I will be intermixing them with new ones that we get to as well. Some like this are in fairly decent condition. This one has seen some restoration work, but as you can see, it kind of needs some more. Others are far worse than this. Some are far better. Others are just piles of ruins. But even though, we'll try to get to all of them, even ones that I can't really find or there's hardly anything left, I'll still try to make videos about them, because some are completely gone, obliterated. So we'll do what we can to at least document what is there or what was there. Alright, so enough yapping about the purpose of the series and stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the history and the function of these things. I always just love the architecture, the stonework on these things. And this is the typical design of these iron furnaces. They do vary a bit in design and size, but this is the typical shape of them. You have the stone, you have the archways. There'll be an archway on the other side as well. Let me back up a little bit so you get the whole thing in frame. Yeah, these were an important part in Pennsylvania's history, and indeed in the surrounding states and in our country's founding. They're a bit iconic in our history. The first one here in Pennsylvania was built in 1720 down near what's called Colebrook Dale. It's out here in southeast Pennsylvania. And they continued making these things through the 1700s into the 1800s. I think they kind of flourished a lot in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution. And I believe a few were even being used in the early 1900s too. And the fuel that they would use to melt the iron out of the iron ore was often charcoal, or they would use, in this area, they would also use anthracite coal, and then maybe in western PA they would use what's called bituminous coal, or something called coke, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But yeah. Oh, and these were super important, like during the Revolutionary War, a lot of these iron furnaces helped make cannons and cannonballs for the colonial army. So that's kind of cool. Some of them we visited, I knew specifically did that. I think was it the one down in York, Cadorus Iron Furnace. It's kind of cool to know that that one helped supply, cannons for the Revolutionary War. So they have an important history here in our state and our country. All right, so time to talk about how these things worked. This is where things might get a little nerdy. Just a warning to you. Like I said, this is their general shape. So there's little openings on the side. Up in the front would be the main opening. This is where the melted iron ore would actually pour out when it was ready. And if you can look on the inside here, of course, it's all stonework on the outside, but also on the inside there would have been an inner lining of brick, which I don't think this one has anymore. I don't think so. Maybe it does. Oh yeah, it still does it. You can see the brickwork there. Well, this one's plugged up on the top. That's why usually there's light coming in here. But yeah, they're lined with brick, like that fire brick I talked about. And usually there's a gap between the brick and the stone. That stone area would be filled with rubble. So this one still does have its inner lining of brick. And there you can see the other opening that goes out to the other arch. Ooh, this one doesn't have, usually there's two openings, so this one only has the one. Let's back out of here. And over here is a waterway. There actually would have been a water wheel in here. The water would have poured down through here. Yeah, this one doesn't have an opening on the other side. A lot of times they do. Trying to get up here. Yeah. Yeah, so water would have come down through here. They would have needed water. You might be wondering, why does an iron furnace need water and a water wheel? But we'll get to that in a moment. But they would load these things from the top. Right, so back here is a hillside. So there would have been like a wooden bridge going from here to the top of that furnace. And that's where they would load, like it was a charcoal iron furnace, which is what a lot of these were. They would load the charcoal, the iron ore, and limestone in there in different layers. And they would load it from the top. So these were usually built next to some kind of hillside like this, where it would be easy to do that. Alright, so back that way is our iron furnace. Because I mentioned the water just a moment ago. There's also another channel right here where the water would flow. There's a creek down there called Mill Creek, the main water source. Up here is the dam for the Lebanon Reservoir. But over here, like so right there's that channel water would have flowed through. And it continues all the way up that way. It's a man-made, it's often called a race. Like this would be the head race that brought the water. It would have been a much earlier dam on the creek up there, which would have diverted water down this way. Of course, they could, alter that flow when they needed to. And it would flow down this way, and then they had a way to divert it over there too for the water wheel. And what that water wheel would do is it would work the bellows. I think we all know what bellows are. Those things, you force air into like a fireplace or a wood stove or other things. That forced air, all that oxygen makes the fire burn hotter. And that's what you want in those furnaces back there. These bellows, I've seen them at the Hopewell iron furnace. They're kind of like in a barrel. They kind of go up and down. Might be two of them. I think in this case there's just one of them. So the bellows be like forcing air into the furnace. So that one side opening back there, the smaller one, would have had like a pipe going into it. And that water wheel would work. There'd be gears attached to the water wheel, and they would, make the bellows go up and down. It would force air into that furnace, making the furnace get hotter and hotter, burn hotter and hotter to get that iron ore melted, get the iron melted out of the iron ore. So that's why you needed the water for the water wheel, for the bellows, to heat that puppy up back there. All right, so you got that charcoal burning in your furnace over here. It's heating up. It's melting. There's a chemical process going on in there with the iron ore and the limestone. Remember, we put limestone in there. So the iron is melting out of the parent material, the iron ore. You don't dig pure iron out of the ground. It's mixed in with the other rock material, and you want to get the iron out, so you got to smelt it or melt it out. And why put limestone in? Well, limestone, there was a chemical reaction that would go on with the limestone. The limestone would react with the waste products of the rock, that wasn't iron, that parent material, and it would form something called calcium silicate, the waste material, and that stuff would float to the top of, let me switch hands here, that stuff would float to the top of the melted iron ore. So you have the iron ore, the iron that melted out of the iron ore would sink to the bottom, and then the flux or the slag would float to the top, the stuff that reacted with the limestone, all the sand and the rock stuff that you don't want in your pure iron at the bottom, so it would float to the top as slag. So that was a good thing. And most of the time when you visit these iron furnaces, you'll see slag piles nearby, because every time they would do this process, they'd have a huge amount of slag left over, because in the iron ore, sometimes only a smaller percentage would be actual iron. I think sometimes a good amount would be like 40% iron. That might be a bit high, but a lot of it was waste material that was of no use. So that'd be that slag. So I don't see a slag pile here, but sometimes it looks like pumice. Parts of it look like pumice, like all bubbly stuff, and other parts are like almost like glass-like. Sometimes it's black or greenish or even purplish in color. It's kind of cool. Usually the glassy or colorful stuff is on top of the more pumice-looking type stuff. We'll see if we can find some around here a little bit. And then I'll talk about, we got to finish, what happens. We got to get down to the bottom and talk about how they let the iron ore out of the furnace. That's kind of the coolest part, how they made that, what they call pig iron. Yeah, so I'm not really seeing any slag up here back behind the furnace. Maybe there's some down by the creek, but there's more to see up here. We'll do that in a future video. I know in the past I followed the head race all the way up to where it meets the creek. But yeah, I think I mentioned this is called the Swatara iron furnace, but we'll talk more in detail about this particular one in a future video. Alright, we gotta make our way back down there anyway. Alright. Yeah, so just quickly, here's a piece of slag that I found down by a Jeep as I was getting ready to leave, so I'll plug this in the video here. If you can see some of the bubbly look to it there. And it does have like a glassy sheen to it as well. This is the slag, the waste material that's left over from the whole process of melting that iron ore out. Alright, well once we get back down there, I'll talk about how the process worked to get the melted iron ore out of the furnace. It's kind of a cool process. But on the way down, we'll talk a little bit more about the fuel sources. Like, a lot of them were charcoal. Of course, you make charcoal from wood. We've talked about this a little bit in the past too. They'd have men called colliers that would live out in the woods. They'd cut down the timber, split it up, and stack it in these huge piles, cover it with dirt, light it on fire, and it was like a controlled burn, and it would turn all that wood into charcoal. They had to tend them carefully, because if the fire got out of control and burned too hot, it would just turn the wood into ash, and then it's no good. So they wanted charcoal, because charcoal still burns. If you ever used a charcoal grill. But the burning charcoal had its disadvantages too. You needed a lot of it, and you needed a lot of trees. So it was a lot of work. You needed a lot of land nearby that was wooded to make that charcoal. It also limited the size of the furnaces too, because if you could only stack so much iron ore on top of the charcoal, otherwise it would crush the charcoal and like disintegrate it. So it kept the size of these furnaces kind of reduced. But then later, when coal was discovered, I think they first used coal over in England for these iron furnaces. But you could use, here in eastern PA, they would use anthracite coal for these furnaces. So some of these furnaces were charcoal and some were anthracite coal. Of course, then you get into central PA and western PA, they would use that bituminous coal or that coke fuel. Which I said, we'll talk about that in a future video, how they made coke from bituminous coal. They use something called coke ovens. But I want to go visit some coke ovens. I'll talk about that in that video. All right. But using coal allowed them to make bigger furnaces because coal wouldn't, crush as easily as charcoal would under the weight of more iron ore. All right, so here we are back at the bottom. Of course, over the side, the smaller hole, remember, is where the pipe from the bellows would go in. Put forced air in there. I feel like this part was redone at some point. It looks newish. Of course, who knows, maybe the bellows went in this one, but this is the larger opening. I think this is where the iron ore actually came out. But yeah, they would, at the bottom here, they would put like a mixture of sand and clay, and it would act like a plug. Of course, there would be a smaller, there would be more brick. There would be that brick lining would be here too, and just be a smaller opening. And of course, as this furnace baked, that clay and sand would turn like into a ceramic. And when the iron ore was, not the iron ore, but when the molten iron was ready to come out, because these would get like 3,000 degrees, prior to that, they would dig a little trench down through here. It'd slope down, dig a little trench, coming down this way, and then they would punch a plug into that ceramic, the clay and sand that turns ceramic, and the molten iron just pour out down this trench. I'd like to make a trench, but the ground is kind of frozen. It's in the 20s out here this morning. And the molten iron flowed down this trench. Let me see if I can recreate that just a little bit. Alright, so I've tried to recreate the process a little bit using sticks. So that big stick represents the trench. So the molten iron would flow down this trench. And down here near the bottom there'd be other little troughs. That's what these sticks represent. So I just have 4 of them. They might have more going up and more going this way. It would flow down the trench, and then it would flow into these little troughs, which are bigger and deeper usually. And that's why they called it pig iron, because it looked like these were like the little piglets, drinking from the mama cow. Not the cow, the mama sow, the pig. So there's like little piglets, pig iron. So that's why it was called that. So these furnaces would make pig iron. And then that pig iron is what they would transport usually to other locations that would like refine it and turn it into other items like wood stoves and cannons and things like that. Some of these furnaces had sites like that on location as well, like Hopewell Iron Furnace. They had the furnace, but they also have the, I would call it the forge or the workshops there where they would make like cast iron products and stuff. A place like this, they didn't have that. So that's kind of how the process works. And as soon as they were done emptying out the molten iron, of course the slag would pour out too. They have to get rid of that. And then usually right away they reloaded it and started the process all over again. So they were these were being used continually. But at some point they'd have to stop and clean it out, because the brick lining would get all kinds of junk on it, that slag and different things. And sometimes at the bottom where the molten iron would gather, sometimes it didn't all pour out, and then a larger chunk of molten iron would form at the bottom. They called that a salamander. There's one at Pine Grove Furnace State Park, a salamander they call it. This is the larger chunk of solidified iron. It would be usually in the bottom in there. Sometimes they had to pull that out because it would just get too big. Yep, but there she is once again. I just love the way they look. Like I said, a lot of them look very similar to this, but there are slightly different variations in designs. So some have been fully restored, some are in ruins. Like I said, there's an importance to documenting these, because even despite preservation efforts, like this one is, like I said, that crack is getting worse and worse. There's a bulge up there. I remember that bulge from last time, so yeah. Who knows, maybe next time we visit this it won't be all looking like it does now, who knows. So this was just a brief summary, maybe not brief to some of you, but it's just a brief summary of the history and the process of how these worked. Obviously there's more I could have told you. There's different types of these. There's hot blast furnace, cold blast furnace, but I kind of gave you the general idea of how they work. If you want to learn more, obviously you can do your own research. There's tons of information online. You could spend a whole day reading about these furnaces. But yeah, there she is again. So yeah, so that is the brief history and summary of how these work. And then as we continue this series, I'll be visiting different iron furnaces to document them, see what there is, the history and what's left of them. Some will be familiar ones that we've been to in the past, and some will be new ones. Some will be whole like this one, and some will just be ruins, unfortunately. So yeah, kind of looking forward to doing this. All right, I'm gonna head off to another location to film, probably another new series I'll be working on. As always, thanks for coming along, and I'll see you around.